Kia ora koutou e te whānau. My name's Chloe and that's my big head. And I actually, to be completely honest with you, I was just texting Johnny, I have no idea what I'm doing here. I was asked to be involved in this, and given a bit of a briefing through email, and now I've learned that I'm talking about governance. So I will do my utmost to extol all of the wisdom that I have accumulated in my 18 months in Parliament. But I also think that I was possibly here for the whole youth demographic thing, given that climate change is very much disproportionately affecting my generation. And in talking about governance, it's a funny one for me because I never intended to be a politician. I'm here and I joke frequently that this was just kind of the logical endpoint of my protesting. And I see it that all of our governmental institutions and all of our institutions and structures are simply the sum of their parts. And fundamentally, all of that is predicated on the culture. So culture is, by definition, about values and about the values that we as a society share. And I find it really fascinating when we talk about concepts like how we haven't acted for the past 40 years. And we also talk about how there's public meetings and people say, don't talk to me about climate change ever again. In the context of today, we obviously just launched the wellbeing budget, but so too I was sat in Environment Select Committee this morning when we were going through the Ministry for the Environment's first submissions on the zero carbon bill. And what I was thinking about in the context of that legislation in particular, because on the one side of things, we've got a lot of people who are saying that this is way too hard on the farmers, as some of the questions are coming through about. And on the other side, we've got a lot of people saying that we're nowhere near ambitious enough. And what was striking me was the political reality of the situation, and that we have an institution, an inherently colonial adversarial system, which has given us 120 MPs, and 3 parties therein have decided to form a government, and 8 of them are Greens. And I very frequently am asked why I'm not able to achieve and do all of the things. The reality is that we have to work to build consensus and a mandate to get anything done. And I think that we're currently stuck in a really quite sad and depressing, actually, feedback loop when it comes to the state of our politics. Where there was a survey released last week. I'm on the Parliamentary Engagement Steering Committee or something. I'm on a lot of committees, there's 8 of us. And it was about how the trust in our parliamentary institution, and particularly our parliamentarians, is kind of at a record low. And you all know this. You all know that people don't really like or trust politicians. But the thing is, the more that we don't like or don't trust our politicians, the less aspiration or hope we have for the institutions. But those very institutions are responsible for delivering any of the stuff that is going to help us get through things like the climate crisis. On the point of the climate crisis, I was having a discussion. I tried to get a declaration of climate emergency through Parliament on Tuesday. And I was having a discussion, Todd put out a press release, so it's pretty obvious who it came from, saying that it was alarmist that we were trying to put this through, and that it was vacuous and there was no substance behind it. And it was, again, just this real tense adversarial situation where one side had to be right and one side had to be wrong. There was no space in the middle for us to come to some form of consensus and build a constructive, collaborative, creative way forward. And I think the fundamental problem therein is that if you were to design a system that was responsible for solving the massive challenges of our time, like climate change, it would not look like our parliament. And it would not look like the current structures that we have in local government either. And I think that we actually have to really consider what the design principles are that we're taking into account here. So in reflecting and writing the few very random notes that I wrote down just before, I'm obviously not here to indoctrinate you, and you can ask me any questions you like, but I was reflecting on why I decided to go into the party that I did, and it was fundamentally actually about the design of the system that they have chosen in terms of the charter for the values that are put as the pillars. So to run you through that and to explain it, and absolutely open to critique, the first and one of the 4 fundamentals is ecological wisdom. So recognition of the fact that resources are finite on this planet. The second is social responsibility. So if you recognise the first premise, that resources are finite, and the very notion of the economy is about sharing those resources. If you recognise that resources are finite, then you have a principle of social responsibility, i.e., basically, you have to make sure that there is fair and just distribution of those resources, because worst case scenario, you end up with civil war if you don't. Then we have the concept of appropriate decision-making, which is essentially about devolving decision-making powers down to the level where it actually affects people. And finally, the fourth charter principle is of non-violence, which obviously at its most extreme end is not sending people to war, but in a more day-to-day kind of vein, I like to think of it as bringing a diversity of viewpoints around the table, because that way you come up with sustainable solutions that take into account different cultural interpretations, and it therefore becomes more fit for purpose, because ultimately it fits more people's lives and it makes sense for more people. It's fundamentally about accessible design. 5 minutes? Okay, cool. And I just also really want to drill into the concept of governance on the kind of what we actually mean when we talk about it. Because we often just go, okay, that's the government, and we talk about it and often use it synonymously with ideas of management or leadership or vision. But all of those three things are very different. You can have a government or a sense of governance which just manages and just keeps everything very stagnant. Or you can have a sense of governance that seeks to lead and implement vision or change culture. And that changes that feedback loop between culture and between governance. The way that I often like to think about it is if you kind of separate out two spheres of change. On the one side of things, you've got structure, and on the other side, you've got culture, and they both absolutely interact, and they require each other. But there are also different leverage points at which you can focus if you want to bring about social change. And within structure, you've got things like legislation, regulation, funding, taxation, incentives, contract, international treaties. And on the other side, when it comes to culture, that shared set of values, the touch points are things like awareness, education, media, collective action, and community building. And what we think about when we think about those kind of cultural things is that essentially structures become set up to institutionalize those cultural values and therefore end up perpetuating them. So when we're talking about things that occurred, for example, in the 1980s in this country and the institutions that were set up thereafter, there are a lot of, we can unpack the terminology around neoliberalism as much as we would like, but, that has essentially embedded a way of thinking economically in this country, which we've been bound to for the last 30 or 40 years. So now what we're looking at when it comes to tackling the climate emergency, the climate issue, the climate crisis, the ecological breakdown, whatever you want to call it, we are trying to build those new institutions that are capable of acting, but they have to have the mandate of people. And therein lies the challenge, really. I speak frequently to rooms like this in Auckland and in Wellington, and I get a lot of people nodding. And then you go out to the regions and you have farmers feeling like they're being vilified. And I really genuinely think that the big problem there is because of how polarised our politics is. It's so daft and it's really unconstructive. And you heard from the kids who are on the climate march. Are you ringing the bell? Okay, cool. You heard from the kids on the climate march that we just need to bloody get on with it. But we are all responsible for upholding and maintaining that status quo. So if you hate your politicians, my call to action is throw them in the bin. Or recycle them. Yeah, recycle them. Compost them. But you know what I mean? They are there either because you elected them or you neglected to. And they derive their power from that mandate. And I genuinely believe that if I can be elected in this country, anybody can. Thank you.